Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles II, answer your questions on Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism. Whether you're trying to comprehend the eternity of the universe, or figure out what you should be doing with your life, if you're seeking the guidance of a comprehensive, rational worldview, simply go to charles2.com/contact and send me a question. And my last name is spelled T as in Tango, E as in Echo, and W as in Whiskey. Given that using reason is a choice, which is not guaranteed to be made by everyone, is it not valid to consider irrational behavior in economic models? Well, before I get into this, I should first note that this was one of 3 or 4 questions in a group of questions, that group being itself just one group among 4 or 5 groups of questions, all revolving around the same issue, or the same broad subject matter, which was the philosophy of economics. So I have chosen just one small piece of this person's litany of questions to answer. Just one question in one of the groups of multiple questions each. And that is because philosophy of economics is not my expertise. But before I get into this, I want to give anyone interested in this subject the same advice that I gave this questioner when I first received these questions. And that is, if you are interested in this subject, then you should look up Harry Binswanger's course, Philosophical Issues in Economics, I believe it's called. And you will find much of interest there. I found it very valuable. So that's a good resource to look into if you are interested in this subject broadly. Now for the actual question. Well, first we have to be clear on what economics is. You talk about economic models. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, but if what you mean is what is usually and rightly considered economics, just the broad, abstract, models in the broad abstract sense, supply and demand, etc. Is irrationality relevant on that conception of economics? No, it is not relevant. The way the market functions is such that it rewards rational behavior and punishes irrational behavior. That is just in the nature of economics. It's just in the nature of economics that irrationality is unimportant. The way the market functions is that the more rational you are, the more power you have to influence the economy. Imagine some Christian businessman. He owns a company, but for its direction, he is going to let Jesus take the wheel. I've worked for people like this. Well, that will lead to the destruction of that business. I'm simplifying here. Of course, you can be mixed and you can make rational decisions sometimes, irrational decisions other times. The point is, to the extent he's irrational, and we'll just take the simple case here, he's completely irrational and he does whatever he feels like, which is all it means to take Jesus's messages seriously, because Jesus's messages are just whatever your subconscious sends you. It's not actually Jesus talking to you. Then this irrational businessman will go out of business. And then what? Oh, well, he's going to buy another company and run that one into the ground too, right? Well, no, because of his irrationality, he lost his money. He didn't make profit. He doesn't have the money to buy another company and run it into the ground because he was irrational. So this is a broader principle than economics, but it applies in economics too. Irrationality is self-limiting. This is just a manifestation of the impotence of evil. So, no, irrationality does not matter. It is not important to consider it in economics. Economics being the study of production and trade, meaning the market. So there's nothing to say that irrational people can't exist. It's just that the market limits their influence. Capitalism does not require that everyone be rational. All it requires is that some people be rational. And there are always some rational people. And so long as there are some rational people, then, to the extent that the market is free, those people will have the most wealth because they will be the most productive. And therefore, they will influence the economy to the extent possible, given what the government is doing, how involved or not involved the government is in the economy. Whatever that setup is, to the extent that there is a market, the most rational people will influence it. Now, there are two directions you can move from here. You can go narrower or you can go broader. Now, if by economic models you mean where is the US economy going to be 5 years from now, well, then irrationality may be more relevant because you're dealing in a shorter time frame, whereas economics as a science is interested in how can you expect the economy to function in general over the long term. And on that conception of economics, irrationality is irrelevant because in the long term, you can know that to the extent there is a market, it will flow in a rational direction. Now, at a certain, people talk about microeconomics, but at a certain level of smallness, you're not talking about economics anymore. Once you get to the point of discussing whether a particular business is going to be rational or irrational, a particular businessman is going to run his company rationally, that is no longer economics. Milton Friedman didn't know anything about how to run a business by his own admission, and you don't need to. That's not economics any longer. Economics is about the interaction and the broad, it's about human trade and production. Not about how one business is, or whether one particular business is going to function well in a particular context or not. But now we could go broader too. And we could bring in politics. And it is through politics that irrationality has an impact on economics. Now, as I say, economics is about production and trade. Now, what is production? I think about it this way. When the government intervenes to redistribute wealth, what is it doing? Well, it's destroying wealth, but why does redistribution destroy wealth? If you just freeze frame the economy, there's so much wealth, now we shift it around. Well, why is that destructive? There's the same amount of wealth, right? Well, a superficial answer is, well, but it costs wealth. It costs something to move the wealth around, and that's true, but that's not the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is that you are taking wealth from the people who produced it and giving it to the people who didn't. You're taking it from the productive, giving it to the non-productive or less productive. Now, that is just another way of saying you are taking it from the rational and giving it to the irrational. What is production? Well, remember what Ayn Rand says about production. Production is the application of reason to the problem of survival. Production is just reason in economic terms. So when you redistribute wealth from the productive to the unproductive, you're redistributing it from the rational to the irrational. Now, there is no economy without production, without wealth that is produced and therefore can be traded. So there isn't actually any, to the extent that there is an economy to speak of, it's because people are acting rationally. There's no such thing as the economics of the irrational. If people are irrational, there is no production or trade. Irrationality doesn't function in economics. It is self-limiting, and rationality rules the day. However, irrationality does affect economics through politics, because people can be irrational in politics and then exert force on people producing and trading. And that can limit what happens in the economy. Now, that is not economics, however. That is politics' impact on economics. For instance, take the minimum wage. Well, whether there's a minimum wage or not, the market will act rationally. If there is no minimum wage, that's the best situation possible. Now, let's say the government institutes a minimum wage, and then companies start hiring fewer people. You get all the consequences of the minimum wage: higher prices, higher unemployment. Well, that is rational in the new context. That is not politics making the market irrational. That is politics being irrational, putting a limit on the market, and then the market being rational in the context of the restrictions of politics. So the market always, again, as I say, to the extent that there is a market, it's because people are acting rationally, no matter what restrictions the government places on the economy or on the market. If there is a market at all, it is functioning rationally. Things are still flowing in the direction of the most rational possible, given the limitations. Now, the best situation is called capitalism, where the only limitation is the facts of reality, is what's actually possible. And then you can do worse from there by regulating and taxing and redistributing and placing artificial limitations on reason and its rewards. But in terms of the market, in terms of economics, irrationality is not important to consider. Reason always wins, so long as production and trade is possible. You can reduce the rewards and of being rational. You can change what being rational means, or what conclusions a rational person will come to, as in the example of the minimum wage. In a free market, if you're being rational, you maybe hire an employee. Under the minimum wage, if the minimum wage is set too high, maybe you don't hire that employee. But that's not a difference of being rational or irrational. It's a difference in what reason dictates given the situation. So government intervention can set a limit on the rewards of reason. It can change what the rational conclusion will be, but so long as there is a market, so long as there is such a thing as economics, so long as the discipline of economics is applicable, then you don't have to worry about irrationality or think about it when you're studying economics. But you should integrate your understanding of economics with politics, and then you can understand how irrationality can affect the economy by leading to limitations placed on the economy. But economics is about the market, and there is no market to the extent that the market is controlled. Control of the market means destruction of the market. So this connects to the point I call the anarchist's fallacy. Anarchists place the market outside of any context. They say that it functions outside of any particular context, that it transcends force, but that is not true. And it is precisely that point that is relevant here. Irrationality can corrupt the marketplace through the logical consequence of irrationality, that is force. So irrationality in politics can affect the market because force can affect the market, and a prohibition on force is a requirement of a marketplace. So libertarians or anarchists won't understand this at all, because for them, the market functions regardless. You can have a market and force. Now, as I've mentioned before, this is incomprehensible. It leads them to an impossible situation. They either have to admit that every situation is anarchy, is the result of anarchism, because the market transcends everything, right? So this is what anarchism looks like. North Korea is anarchism. Everything is anarchism because the market doesn't just operate in any context. That's what the market shows. I mean, that's what you're saying, right? There's no deviation from the market because the market always operates. So you could take that approach, or they could say that, well, no, anarchy is a specific thing, but we don't have it right now, in which case they face the problem of explaining how we got here. They can say, well, no, North Korea is an anarchy. Okay, well then what corrupted the market? Well, they have no answer to that because they don't understand that a market can only exist in the absence of force. So anyway, that's just another point that's relevant here. So is irrationality relevant or important to consider in economics? No. Economics is about rational activity. Irrationality can affect the market, but to the extent that there is a market, what you are studying is rational activity. If you want to keep up with everything I do, just go to charles2.com. If you want to make it possible for me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charles2 and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.